The operation that should have ended with 19 arrests ended with 3. It had taken 14 months to build. A joint surveillance operation coordinated across 6 European countries, targeting a financial facilitation network that moved sanctioned funds for Iranian proxy organizations through a chain of correspondent banking relationships stretching from Frankfurt to Nicosia to Dubai. 14 months of signal intelligence, physical surveillance, financial mapping, informant cultivation, and diplomatic coordination. 14 months of work by investigators in 6 countries who had been careful, methodical, and they believed secure. The morning the operation launched, the targets were gone. Not all of them. 3 lower-tier operators had not received the warning in time, or had not believed it, or had been too slow to move. Those 3 were arrested at their registered addresses. The other 16 were not there. Their apartments were empty. Their phones were offline. Their financial accounts had been drained in the 48 hours before the operation launched. In 2 cases, the surveillance teams conducting pre-dawn positioning noted lights on in the target residences at 3 a.m. People awake at an hour that no ordinary schedule explained, moving through rooms they were about to leave permanently. Someone had warned them. Someone who had known the operation's timeline, its target list, the specific addresses that had been compiled over 14 months of painstaking intelligence work. Someone with access to the operational coordination infrastructure that connected the 6 national law enforcement agencies involved. Infrastructure that ran, for a significant portion of its interagency communication, through Interpol's secure coordination channels. The formal inquiry into the operational failure was opened within 48 hours. It was conducted officially by Interpol's internal oversight mechanisms, unofficially through channels that run parallel to and entirely separate from official institutional oversight, through a unit whose involvement in the inquiry was known to fewer than a dozen people on Earth. It was conducted by secret elite. What secret elite found over the course of the following 16 weeks was not one compromised analyst. It was a systematic infiltration of Interpol's operational coordination infrastructure by Iranian intelligence. An infiltration that had been running for an estimated 3 years, that had compromised 4 individuals within Interpol's analytical and communications divisions, and that had, over those 3 years, produced a stream of operational intelligence that had allowed Iranian intelligence and the proxy financial networks it protected to stay precisely 1 step ahead of every major law enforcement effort targeting their infrastructure. The 4 compromised individuals were not the entirety of the problem. They were the Interpol layer of a broader network that secret elite would ultimately map across 19 countries. A network that combined the 4 Interpol assets with 11 additional compromised individuals embedded in the national law enforcement agencies of 7 countries, creating an intelligence coverage capability that was, in its operational effect, almost perfectly designed to neutralize coordinated international law enforcement action against Iranian-connected financial and operational networks. Understanding how Iranian intelligence had built this capability required secret elite to reconstruct 3 years of institutional history, to identify, through behavioral analysis, financial forensics, access log review, and signal intelligence, the specific moments at which each compromised individual had been recruited, the method used in each case, and the operational product that each had provided over their active period. The 4 Interpol assets had been recruited through 3 different methods, which itself told secret elite something important about the sophistication of the Iranian intelligence operation targeting the institution. Iranian intelligence had not relied on a single recruitment approach. It had tailored their recruitment method to the individual, a recognition that different people have different vulnerabilities, and that a single recruitment methodology, applied uniformly, would eventually create a pattern that institutional security systems could identify. The first Interpol asset was a senior intelligence analyst in the Financial Crimes Division, the division responsible for coordinating interagency intelligence on transnational financial crime. He had been recruited through ideological cultivation, a process that had begun with his academic work and had developed through a series of professional relationships, conference interactions, and research collaborations that had been engineered over a period of 2 years to progressively shift his understanding of international financial enforcement from a technical professional function to a political one. By the time he was asked, by someone he had come to regard as a trusted professional mentor, to share information about active operations targeting what was described to him as legitimate Iranian business activity, being persecuted for geopolitical reasons. He had been prepared to interpret the request as morally justified. The second was a communications systems coordinator, whose role gave him access to the encrypted coordination channels through which Interpol facilitated operational information, sharing between member state agencies during joint operations. He had been recruited through financial pressure, a gambling debt that had grown to a size that made his life, in practical terms, unmanageable, and that Iranian intelligence had become aware of through financial monitoring of a specific category of individuals in sensitive positions. The debt was resolved. The expectation of access followed. The third was a data management officer in the Protected Persons Database Division, the unit responsible for maintaining Interpol's records on protected witnesses, undercover operatives, and individuals whose identities and locations were held under the highest levels of institutional security. She had been recruited through a personal relationship that had been deliberately constructed over 18 months by an Iranian intelligence officer operating under commercial cover in Geneva. She had not known when the relationship began that her partner had any connection to intelligence work. By the time she understood what had been asked of her and what she had already provided, the leverage was sufficient to ensure her continued compliance. The fourth was a junior analyst in the counterterrorism division whose access was more limited than the others, but whose specific function, preparing the briefing summaries distributed to senior Interpol officials before major coordinated operations, gave Iranian intelligence a reliable preview of every significant joint operation in the planning stage, regardless of which national agencies were involved. He had been recruited through a combination of financial inducement and war. And certes documented as targeted social engineering, a process through which Iranian intelligence had identified his specific psychological profile and constructed an approach that exploited his desire for professional recognition and his resentment of institutional hierarchy. Together, these four individuals had provided Iranian intelligence with a capability that was, in operational effect, equivalent to having a senior observer present in the coordination center for every major international law enforcement operation, targeting Iranian-connected networks for 3 years. They had known which operations were coming. They had known the timelines. They had known the targets. They had known, in the case of the Protected Persons Database Officer, the identities and locations of witnesses whose testimony underpinned prosecutions of Iranian-connected financial and operational networks in 7 countries. The 11 additional compromised individuals in the national law enforcement agencies of 7 countries extended this coverage into the operational layer below the Interpol coordination infrastructure. 3 were in European national police agencies. 2 were in financial intelligence units. 3 were in prosecutorial offices with oversight of active Iranian-connected cases. 2 were in immigration enforcement agencies with access to travel and identity records. 1 was in a national intelligence service whose analytical products were regularly shared through Interpol channels, meaning that Iranian intelligence's access to his reporting gave it insight not only into what that service knew, but into what Interpol's member agencies were being told that service knew. The operational product of this 15-person network, accumulated over 3 years, amounted to a systematic intelligence advantage that had allowed Iranian proxy financial networks to operate in Europe with near impunity. Operations that should have resulted in mass arrests had yielded minimal outcomes. Prosecutions that should have been supported by comprehensive financial evidence had been undermined by the disappearance of key financial records before they could be secured. Witnesses whose testimony was critical to major cases had been approached, in several cases, in ways that suggested their identities had been compromised. Approaches that had, in 3 instances, resulted in witnesses withdrawing their cooperation entirely. The financial networks that had been protected by 3 years of advance warning had moved an assessed $680 million in sanctioned funds through European financial infrastructure during the period. Funds connected to Iranian proxy organizations, whose activities in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen had direct operational consequences for civilian populations in those conflict environments. $608 million, protected not by sophisticated evasion alone, but by the specific operational intelligence that allowed the networks to know exactly when and where to move, when to be still, and when to disappear entirely before the moment of interdiction. Secret Elite's operational planning for the interdiction was complicated by a challenge that it had not encountered in precisely this form in any previous operation: the need to simultaneously remove a surveillance and warning capability that was embedded in the institution whose coordination infrastructure Secret Elite needed to use to execute the operation. If Secret Elite coordinated the interdiction through Interpol's standard channels, the 4 compromised Interpol assets would see it coming. If Secret Elite bypassed Interpol's channels entirely, it lost the coordination mechanism that was essential for synchronizing simultaneous arrests across 19 countries involving the law enforcement agencies of 14 of those countries. The solution required a degree of compartmentalization that stretched the operational security protocols of every national partner involved. A parallel coordination infrastructure, entirely separate from Interpol's standard channels, operating through direct encrypted bilateral links between Secret Elite's coordination center and the relevant national agency counterparts, was constructed and tested over 4 weeks before operational planning entered its final phase. The national agency counterparts who were read into the parallel infrastructure were vetted individually by Secret Elite's Counterintelligence division against the full intelligence picture developed during the 16-week investigation. 11 proposed read-ins were rejected after the vetting process identified indicators of potential compromise or unacceptable exposure risk. The 4 Interpol assets and the 11 nationally based compromised individuals were designated as simultaneous arrest targets. All 15 had to be taken into custody before any one of them could communicate with Iranian intelligence handlers or with each other. The window for simultaneous arrest across 19 countries, accounting for time zone distribution and the logistical requirements of coordinating pre-dawn operations on multiple continents, was calculated at 28 minutes. The financial interdiction, designed to freeze the assets of the proxy financial networks that the 15-person warning network had been protecting, was the largest component of the operation by jurisdictional scope. 47 bank accounts across 12 European countries, 9 cryptocurrency wallets, and 19 shell company asset freezes. In Cyprus, Malta, Luxembourg, and the British Virgin Islands were designated for simultaneous action. The total value of assets targeted for freezing was approximately $94 million. The liquid operational float of the networks active at the time of interdiction. The broader enforcement actions targeting the $680 million in flows identified during the investigation were designated as follow-on prosecutorial actions to be executed through the restored, uncompromised coordination infrastructure in the months following the primary interdiction. The Iranian intelligence officers who had recruited and managed the 15-person network operated from postings in 5 countries. 3 operated under diplomatic cover. 2 operated under commercial cover, a status that made them arrestable, though the evidentiary requirements for prosecution in the relevant jurisdictions were complex. The 3 operating under diplomatic cover could not be arrested. The 2 under commercial cover were included in the arrest planning, with the understanding that prosecution would require careful legal preparation in the relevant national jurisdictions. The operation launched at 4:30 a.m. on a Thursday, synchronized across every time zone involved through the parallel coordination infrastructure. All 15 designated arrest targets were reached within the 28-minute window. 14 were taken into custody cleanly. 1, the communications systems coordinator who had provided access to Interpol's operational channels, barricaded himself in his apartment and destroyed 2 devices before the arrest team breached the door. The devices were damaged, but not beyond forensic recovery. The data extracted from their remnants over the following 72 hours included communication logs that substantially expanded the map of the Iranian intelligence network beyond what Secret Elite had identified during the investigation. Both Iranian intelligence officers operating under commercial cover were arrested in coordinated actions with national law enforcement in their respective countries of operation. Their prosecution, complex, lengthy, and subject to legal challenges that Secret Elite had anticipated and prepared legal consultation for during the planning phase. was designated as a priority for the relevant national prosecutorial authorities. The 3 Iranian intelligence officers operating under diplomatic cover were identified to their host countries' governments through intelligence channels. 2 were expelled within 3 weeks. The 3rd remained in place for 47 days while a diplomatic process played. Die Prasira Pras Soliafori Sorias Dachasias Hanite. The secret elite monitored with careful attention, and that concluded with the officers' recall to Tehran, under circumstances that made clear the host country's position. The 47 bank accounts, 9 cryptocurrency wallets, and 19 shell company asset freezes were executed simultaneously with the arrests. 11 of the 14 national financial regulatory partners confirmed successful execution within the 28-minute window. 3 encountered jurisdictional processing delays that extended execution by between 40 and 90 minutes. Delays that were within the acceptable operational tolerance, because the arrest of all 15 warning network members had already eliminated the possibility of the financial targets receiving advance warning. The 3-year intelligence advantage that Iranian proxy financial networks had maintained over European law enforcement was gone. The restored coordination infrastructure, rebuilt in the weeks following the operation through a process that Interpol's institutional leadership, fully briefed on the nature of the compromise, participated in with a level of engagement that Secret Elite's operations team documented as exemplary, was tested through a series of smaller coordinated operations in the months following the primary interdiction. None of those operations were compromised. The 14 months of work that had gone into the operation that should have ended with 19 arrests and ended with 3 was not wasted. The intelligence developed during those 14 months, no longer visible to Iranian intelligence through the compromised coordination channels, formed the evidentiary foundation for prosecutions in 4 European countries that produced, in the 2 years following Secret Elite's interdiction, 31 convictions connected to the proxy financial networks that had been protected for 3 years. The 6 European countries whose 14 months of joint operational work had been neutralized by the compromised warning network did not know, for some time, the full scope of what had been working against them. When the picture became clear, when the intelligence was shared through appropriate channels with the investigators who had built that 14-month case and watched it collapse on the morning it was supposed to conclude, the reaction, as documented in the internal debrief, was not anger. It was something quieter. The recognition that the work had not been flawed, that the methods had been sound, that the failure had come from outside the operation, from inside the institution they had trusted to protect it. Secret Elite does not offer comfort on that point. The institutions through which international law enforcement coordinates are real vulnerabilities. Not because those institutions are weak, but because they are valuable enough that the effort required to compromise them is effort that state-level intelligence services are willing to expend. Iranian intelligence had spent 3 years and significant operational resources to build a 15-person network inside Interpol and 7 national agencies. It had done so because the return on that investment, the protection of $680 million in financial flows, the neutralization of every major coordinated enforcement action targeting those flows, was worth the investment. Secret Elite found the network. 16 weeks of investigation. A 28-minute operational window. 15 arrests. The warning capability that had run for 3 years, invisible inside the institution built to coordinate the response to exactly this kind of threat, gone. The next coordinated operation targeting Iranian proxy financial networks in Europe did not leak. The operation after that did not leak either. The restored infrastructure held. The world does not know that Interpol was compromised for 3 years. It does not know that 15 people inside the international law enforcement coordination infrastructure had been providing a real-time intelligence preview of every major joint operation to Iranian intelligence handlers. It does not know that $680 million moved through European financial systems protected by that preview, and that the financial networks that moved it funded organizations whose activities left marks in the civilian environments of 4 conflict zones. The world knows none of this. It only knows, if it is paying close attention, that a joint operation in Europe several years ago concluded with 3 arrests instead of 19, and that the inquiry into why produced no public findings. The findings were not public. They were classified, and they were acted on in 16 weeks of investigation, in 28 minutes of synchronized global action, and in the years of uncompromised coordinated enforcement that followed. That is what Secret Elite is for. Not the cases the world sees. The cases that make the cases the world sees possible. This is a fictional dramatization inspired by international law enforcement and intelligence cooperation concepts. No real operations, agencies, task forces, or individuals are depicted. All characters, organizations, and events are entirely fictional and created for narrative purposes. If a state-level intelligence service is willing to invest 3 years and significant operational resources to place 4 assets inside a single international coordination institution, because the return on protecting $680 million in financial flows justifies that investment. What does that tell us about the structural relationship between the value of international law enforcement coordination and the incentive to corrupt it? When 15 people across Interpol and 7 national agencies can collectively neutralize 3 years of joint enforcement effort, targeting a proxy financial network, what is the realistic upper bound on how many similar networks are running right now inside institutions whose compromise has not yet been identified? And when the compromise is found, as Secret Elite found this one, what is the obligation of the institution itself to the investigators whose years of work was neutralized, while the institution, unknowingly, protected the network they were trying to dismantle? Subscribe to Secret Elite for more heroic intervention stories about operations that saved lives the world never knew were at risk. Where evil operates in the shadows, Secret Elite is already there, working before the threat becomes the tragedy. Hashtag Secret Elite. Hashtag Heroic Intervention. Hashtag Rescue Operation. Hashtag International Justice. Hashtag Counterintelligence. Hashtag Network. Dismantled. Hashtag Global Coordination. Hashtag True Crime. Hashtag Justice. Hashtag Interpol. Compromised. Hashtag Iranian-Intelligence. Hashtag Sanctions Evasion.